The galaxy feared her. Entire moons burned in her name. Her throne sat atop the bones of worlds that disobeyed. But when Empress Thalexa stormed back into her war chamber, cloaked in armor older than some stars, she didn't expect to find her daughter laughing not with generals, not with guards, but with a single human man kneeling to button her coat. And in that strange, quiet moment, the woman who once silenced empires found herself unable to speak. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from: star system, city, or sector. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just shatter what you thought you knew about power. No one was supposed to be in the throne room. Not at this hour, not after the conquest of Regulus IX had scorched half the imperial fleet. And certainly not while the Empress herself was still peeling battlefield soot from her skin, the scent of ash and victory clinging to her like a second cape. The obsidian gates groaned as they opened, folding back like the jaws of some ancient beast. And Empress Thalexa strode in without ceremony, the kind of entrance that made admirals stand straighter and scribes forget their own names. But the room was not empty. At the foot of her throne, a child stood. Her child. Small, blue-skinned, wide-eyed, bundled in a coat far too intricate for palace servants to have stitched. And kneeling in front of her, back turned, was a man. Human. Male. His posture was unthreatening, even gentle, one knee pressed into the gleaming stone, the other up to support the child's balance. He was fastening the last button of the little girl's coat with a care so precise it bordered on sacred. He didn't flinch when the doors slammed shut behind Thalexa. He didn't kneel deeper. He didn't look up. He simply checked the seams of the coat with a final pat and said something the surveillance orbs couldn't quite catch, but it made the child giggle. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was tension, thick as war steel. Thalexa could feel her pulse in her fingertips, in her throat. She had stared down planetary rebellions, watched execution crowds beg for her mercy, and never once had she lost command of her own voice. But now, her lips parted, and no command came out. No threat, no scream, just breath sharp and uneven. One of the guards finally stepped forward, blaster half raised. "Majesty," he rasped, trying to reclaim the gravity of the moment. "Shall I?" "No," she said too quickly. Her voice cracked like glass. She cleared it. "No. Stand down." The human looked up slowly. He wasn't handsome in the polished way Virexian nobles valued. His hair was wind-tousled, his jaw a map of faded scrapes. He wore no uniform, just a grey tunic with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that looked like they belonged to someone who built things for a living or had once tried to hold something together and failed. His eyes met hers. They didn't plead, they didn't rebel, they simply were steady, warm, impossibly tired. "She asked for help with the buttons," he said softly, as if that were enough. And somehow, it was. Thalexa looked at her daughter, her heir, the last softness she'd allowed herself to love. And the girl, this fearless, sapphire child, looked up at the man like he was gravity itself. "We don't do soft things here," Thalexa whispered to herself, but the words felt old, rusted, untrue. The Empress did not blink, even as the man gently rose to his feet, brushing his palms on his tunic. She held her position at the edge of the chamber's central seal, the black, glassy disc etched with the names of every system she had conquered. Her shadow crossed half a galaxy's worth of ruin, and yet the child clung not to her, but to the man who stood beside her, one hand protectively hovering near her shoulder. Thalexa had seen diplomats grovel and tyrants quake beneath her gaze. This man did neither. He didn't posture, didn't shrink, didn't even bow. He simply looked at her as if she were a person, not a storm. She took one step forward. The ring of guards followed. Her voice, when it came, was low and sharp, not the thunder she used for public decimations, but the blade she kept behind her teeth. "That coat," she said, eyes narrowing. "Where did you get it?" He glanced down. "Was in my pack," he said. She was cold. "You presumed to clothe a royal heir in scavenged rags." "Didn't look like a rag to me," he said, shrugging. "Looked warm." She liked the buttons. Her eyes snapped to the coat. It was deep violet, stitched with swirling threadwork that shimmered like frozen nebulae. Not Virexian tailoring. older, stranger. Her stomach twisted, just slightly. "What's your name?" He hesitated, then answered, "Cal." "Cal what?" "Just Cal." That answer, infuriatingly flat, made several guards shift uneasily. One of them reached for his weapon, but Thalexa raised a hand. She was still staring at the coat. The sigils along the trim weren't decorative, they were ancient meridian memory glyphs, barely legal to own, let alone wear. And this man, this human, had simply draped them over her daughter's shoulders without understanding what he held. Or worse, with full understanding. She stepped closer, the heat of her armor misting the air. "You're not from here." "No," he said. "Earth. Originally, Earth was declared non-operational 3 cycles ago." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know." The girl, unbothered by the tension crackling between the adults, tugged gently at the coat's hem. "Mama," he made the buttons warm. Thalexa froze. "What?" The child beamed, lifting the lapel. "They glow when you press them, like stars." As if to prove it, she tapped one. The glyph shimmered not just with light, but with warmth. Emotional calibration. Meridian tech. "You activated the coat?" Thalexa demanded. "I didn't mean to," Cal replied. She touched it. It responded. "That coat hasn't responded to anyone in 200 years. He raised an eyebrow. Maybe it was just waiting for someone with small hands and big opinions. There was a long silence. Then Thalexa asked, "Who are you really?" "Just Cal." He looked down at the little girl who now held his finger like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then he looked up at the most feared woman in the galaxy and said, "Someone who used to know how to button a coat." Long before he stood in a Virexian war chamber, Cal had learned how to braid his daughter's hair while the earth cracked around them. He'd learned how to warm soup without power, how to read bedtime stories by flashlight, how to hide the sound of sirens behind lullabies. The collapse hadn't been dramatic. It had been slow, bureaucratic. One broken link at a time, until everything that held civilization together snapped. When the transport grids failed, he walked. When the food depots shut down, he grew what he could in planter boxes made from scrap. And when the sky over Sector 12 burned red for the 3rd time in a week, he dug. His daughter, Mila, had been 6 when the evacuation was announced. 7 by the time the shuttles started leaving without names like theirs on the manifests. He taught her how to make paper birds while they waited. They folded 57 of them in total. She named each one after a place she'd never see. Then one night, a shuttle came, unmarked and quiet. He didn't ask where it was going. He only asked if it had room for 2. It didn't. She made him promise. "If you get off world, Daddy, you help a kid like me. You promise." And she gave him the last paper bird, the one with her name in gold ink. He held it the entire flight. The station they dropped him at was a junk loop over the Acheron belt. No gravity, no promise, just recycled air and voices that didn't care where he came from. He worked, repaired wiring, hauled oxygen canisters, swapped out filters in ducts older than most memories. He talked less and less, folded his grief into smaller and smaller spaces until it lived inside the calluses of his hands. He didn't know how long he stayed up there before a malfunctioning diplomatic vessel limped into the loop with a cracked hull and a screaming baby in its med bay. No one knew who she was. The pilot was dead. The escort was missing. The girl was royal, maybe. Dangerous, maybe. But she was crying, and no one knew how to hold her. Cal did. He cradled her in the crook of his arm and hummed the same tune he'd used for Mila. She stopped crying. When her skin glowed faintly under his hand, someone called security. He didn't fight it. He just held her a few seconds longer. They took her away. He figured that was the end. But then came the request. The Empress's daughter had begun screaming again, not from pain, but from absence. The medbots couldn't settle her. The guards failed. The palace nurse declared the child emotionally imprinted. That's when they came back for him, not as a threat, as a solution. And so he came, wearing nothing but a patched tunic and an old promise in his pocket. He didn't ask for a throne room, just a coat. And when she asked for help with the buttons, he helped. The Empress of Virexia was not used to being disobeyed. Even silence in her presence was a form of submission. Her voice had rewritten planetary constitutions. Her gaze had driven entire species into exile. But as she stood beneath the crystalline lattice of the throne chamber, her daughter's small fingers still entwined in the human's hand, she felt something unfamiliar curling beneath her armor, not rage, not confusion. Uncertainty. It gnawed at her pride like rust on gold. Around them, the imperial court coiled like a nest of jeweled vipers. Ministers, strategists, judges from the outer sectors, all frozen mid-breath, not by orders but by disbelief, because the child wasn't afraid, because the man wasn't groveling, because somehow, impossibly, this moment didn't belong to any of them. Cal knelt again beside the girl as she babbled about the stars on her coat and how he made them shine like hugs. He nodded along gently, never once breaking eye contact with her. The Empress watched every movement. There was no spell, no tech she could detect. The palace scions reported no manipulation. This was something worse. Trust. Thalexa turned sharply to her Minister of Discipline. Why wasn't I informed that the child had formed an imprint? The minister bowed too low, spine creaking. Majesty. She hadn't shown signs, not until today. Then either your senses are broken or your definition of signs is... Thalexa snapped. The child spun on the spot and looked up at her mother. Mama. Cal made the coat do magic. The words struck like a blade dulled by innocence. The court murmured, hushed and uncertain. One of the senators, a tall Vayari with silver scales and 4 eyes, took a half step forward. Your Grace, may I speak plainly? Thalexa gave a curt nod. This human's presence here undermines your control. If the child is compromised, the bloodline may be compromised. The moment hung like ice in gravity. Cal stood, finally. Not defiant, not afraid, just still. She's not compromised, he said. She's a child. You forget your place. The Vayari hissed. I never asked for a place, Cal said, then looked at the Empress. But she needed warmth, and someone to listen. And why? Thalexa asked coldly. Would a man with no planet and no people risk speaking to me this way? He looked her dead in the eye. Because not all species fear you. It landed like a shockwave. The Empress stepped forward again, now close enough to see the lines behind his eyes, the scar just above his collarbone, the way he tilted slightly as if years of favoring a limp had trained his balance. She could end this with a word. He knew that. Everyone did, but he didn't flinch. He simply adjusted the coat on her daughter's shoulders once more, tugging it straight, careful and precise. And for the first time in years, Thalexa felt something crack under her skin. Not weakness, not submission, recognition. The coat should not have worked. Thalexa knew the rules of ancient Meridian tech better than most living rulers. Glyph thread wasn't just ornamental, it was encoded memory, forged from strands of psionic fiber once spun by custodians who could fold lore and language into fabric. Those threads required calibration, legacy access, and bloodline permissions, so archaic they bordered on myth. And yet, the coat, one she had only seen once, in a forgotten archive sealed beneath the moons of Virexael, now shimmered gently on her daughter's shoulders. Not volatile, not threatening, warm, responsive. She moved closer. The glyphs shifted in rhythm to the child's heartbeat. What kind of coat did you say this was? She asked the human. Cal stood with his arms loosely crossed. Didn't, just knew it was warm. Her voice sharpened. You expect me to believe you don't know what's stitched into that? I know enough to tell it listens, he said. Not to rank, not to blood, to need. The ministers behind her shifted again, glances darting like sparks in dry brush. One of the younger courtiers, an archivist's son from Sector 11, stepped forward, his voice trembling. Majesty, the threads match. Ancient Meridian indexing. I cross-checked the patterns there. They're not decorative. Thalexa narrowed her gaze. Say it clearly. The boy swallowed. They're coded instructions, a guardian protocol. The coat doesn't just warm the wearer. It evaluates their emotional regulation, their threat profile, and responds with calibrated resonance fields. It protects them, adapts to them. She turned slowly to Cal. You gave a royal heir a sentient artifact without understanding what it was. No, he said quietly. I gave a shivering kid a coat. The rest is your problem. The honesty landed like a slap. She couldn't decide if it was arrogance or integrity. But either way, it disrupted everything the court understood about control. She stepped forward, now close enough to touch the coat. The glyphs shimmered again. One caught her eye, a broken arc crowned with a dot. Her breath caught. That was not a common symbol. It was a custodian's mark. Few in the galaxy remembered the custodians, those who once served, not by decree, but by caretaking forgotten truths. They were not rulers, they were reminders. That coat belonged to one of them. "Where did you say you found this?" she asked, voice lower now. Cal hesitated. "I didn't find it. It was my daughter's." The throne room went still. "You have a child?" she asked, almost cautious. "Had," he corrected. "She didn't make it off Earth." Thalexa stared at him, the silence stretching like cloth pulled too tight. "I promised her I'd help a kid one day," he added, "that I'd try to keep someone warm. That's all this island." Her daughter looked up and beamed. "He makes the coat feel like a hug." And there, in front of a throne forged from conquest and guarded by fear, the most advanced technology in the known galaxy responded to something no algorithm could quantify. A buttoned coat, a remembered promise, and a heart still trying to keep it. The war court recessed, but the moment lingered. Even as the guards melted back into their positions and the senators resumed their curated silence, something vital had shifted in the air, like a wire inside the galaxy had been plucked and now hummed with a new, unfamiliar frequency. The child clutched the hem of her coat and sat cross-legged on the polished stone, absent-mindedly tracing the embroidery with one curious fingertip. Cal didn't speak. He didn't move to leave. He simply remained, as he always had, steady, unnoticed, until someone needed something repaired. Thalexa stayed standing longer than protocol dictated. She didn't want to sit, didn't want to be seen seated when her entire foundation felt like it had cracked. She had lived her reign by certainties. Fear works, control holds, attachments weaken. But the coat, the man, the child's laughter, none of it obeyed the rules she'd carved in blood. The Minister of Security approached with careful steps. "Majesty, we can detain him for questioning. Quietly. Frame it as a protective measure for the heir." "No," she said. "Then at least move the child. We can. She stays where she island." The minister hesitated. "With him?" Thalexa turned slowly, her stare sharper than any blade. "Do you think I fear a man who buttons coats and keeps his promises?" He said nothing more. Cal looked up then, sensing her attention. His eyes weren't challenging. They were tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying something far heavier than time. "I was an engineer once," he said aloud, "to no one and everyone. Before Earth burned, before we ran out of stars to trust, I built pressure stabilizers, fuel cores, stuff no one remembers until it stops working." His voice stayed even. "My daughter, Myla, she was better with people, better with hope. She used to hand me paper birds after I finished a project and say, 'You fixed a thing, now fix a someone.' She made it sound like the same job." Thalexa's eyes narrowed. "And this child, she's your redemption." Cal shook his head. "No such thing as redemption, just repetition. Doing it again until you get it right." He looked down at the girl, who had now fallen asleep on his boot, her hand still holding a corner of the coat like a lifeline. "This wasn't about me saving her. It was about keeping a promise to someone I lost." The Empress felt the weight of those words settle into her bones like cold iron. She had spent cycles commanding armies, crafting treaties under threat of annihilation, and forging peace through dominance. But no one had ever looked her in the eye and spoken of repair, not of machines, not of people. A general once told her that survivors are the most dangerous beings in the galaxy because they've already lost everything, and yet they stay. She looked again at Cal and realized she was no longer sure which one of them held more power. The council chamber was colder than the throne room. Built into the spine of the citadel, it echoed with every breath, every shift of armor, every whispered doubt. The walls shimmered with embedded stardust, remnants of systems conquered long ago, their light now just decoration. Thalexa stood at the center dais, flanked by advisors whose faces betrayed everything their words would not. The child sat to the side, legs swinging freely from a chair too large, clutching a paper bird Cal had folded from a starch map of her lineage. Cal stood opposite the throne, unshackled, unarmed, and entirely unafraid. "This isn't a trial," he said quietly, "but it smells like one." A ripple passed through the court. "Correct," Thalexa said, descending the steps slowly. "You're not here to be condemned. You're here to be measured." One of the elder counselors cleared his throat. "Majesty, we recommend caution. The Meridian artifact, his unauthorized proximity to the heir." "I've heard your recommendations," Thalexa interrupted. "Now hear mine." She turned to Cal, studying him the way one might study an ancient weapon found in a forgotten vault. "You say you are no threat. You say you act out of care, not conquest. Then show us." "Show you what?" "That you can stay," she said, voice sharp, "not as a prisoner, as a presence, for one full cycle. You will remain in the palace, tend to the heir's well-being, and prove that softness is not a liability." Cal blinked. "You want me to babysit?" Gasps. One senator visibly choked on his breath. Thalexa allowed a small, sharp smile. "I want you to care, and I want this court to watch. Every day, every moment. If at any point you falter, the trial ends. And what happens if I don't falter?" The smile vanished. "Then the court will be forced to admit that compassion is not beneath us. It is what has been missing." He hesitated, not out of fear, but gravity, like someone choosing to walk across ice he knew might not hold. "I'll need two things," he said finally. The guards tensed. "Speak them," Thalexa said. "Time alone with her at night. No surveillance." Murmurs exploded across the chamber. "Unacceptable," a diplomat shouted. "He could implant—" "She's a kid," Cal said, raising his voice for the first time. "You want me to help her sleep? I need trust, or at least the illusion of it." Thalexa raised a hand, silencing the court. "And your second request?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out the paper bird, edges crinkled, gold ink fading. "A place where I can hang this. Somewhere small, somewhere quiet." A pause. Then, "Granted." The decree rang through the chamber. No cheers followed, only the quiet sound of a child's breath as she curled beside her guardian, the soft rustle of a paper wing in his hand, and the beginning of something the galaxy hadn't seen in a very long time. A man being asked to prove his worth by how gently he could hold something that wasn't his. The first day, he made her laugh with spoons. Not gadgets, not simulations, just 3 ordinary spoons from the royal kitchen, each balanced on a different part of his face, until she shrieked with laughter and clapped her tiny hands. The palace had not heard that sound in cycles, not since the Empress's late consort had held the child with clumsy tenderness between battle briefings. In the corner of the surveillance chamber, the generals muttered about weakness, but they kept watching. The second day, Cal taught her how to fold. Not weapons, paper. He turned palace maps, spare reports, scraps of old declarations into birds, stars, and tiny boats that floated in her bath until she fell asleep in the water. One aide logged the act as non-hostile psychological engagement. Another wrote, "Subject demonstrates attention to routine, emotional grounding, and symbolic ritual." The third day, she cried, nightmares maybe, or the pressure of a crown she didn't yet understand. But her sobs echoed down the marble halls until even the guards at the outer gates looked up. Cal didn't panic. He simply scooped her up, paced the moonlit corridor, and hummed something old and earthbound, a lullaby no one had translated in generations. Within minutes, she stilled, breathing pressed against his chest, heartbeats sinking to his rhythm. By the fourth day, the staff stopped pretending not to watch him. One of the palace engineers slipped him a sealed thermos and murmured, "For your tea." A high-ranking scribe left blank scrolls on his bench in case the kid wants to draw. Even the Empress, though she never said it aloud, lingered longer during her inspections. She found herself watching how he listened to her daughter, how he knelt to eye level, how he asked before entering the child's space. He never told her what to be, he let her become. The court began to fracture, not with rebellion, but with possibility. They began to ask questions once too dangerous to entertain. What if strength wasn't about fear? What if leadership could be modeled on consistency, not cruelty? On the 6th day, she scraped her knee. Nothing serious. A tumble from a too-fast sprint in the corridor. But when she yelped, Cal was already there, crouched beside her, examining the scrape with steady hands. "You're okay," he said. "It's just red. Red is the color of learning sometimes." She sniffled. "Does it make me weak?" "No," he said. "It makes you paying attention." Then he pulled a strip of cloth from his sleeve, a torn edge from an old shirt, washed so many times it had become something between silk and memory, and wrapped it gently around her knee. The Royal Med team stood frozen nearby, holding sterile packs and nanobots. But the girl waved them off. She only wanted the cloth, and the man who tied it like it was treasure. By the end of the 7th day, the child refused to sit on the imperial throne unless Cal was in the room. At first, Thalexa resisted. Protocol demanded separation. The heir must never appear dependent, never form attachments that could be leveraged. But resistance didn't last long. Not when she watched her daughter straighten her back in that oversized chair, fingers laced in her lap, mimicking Cal's calm posture. Not when she parroted his words with such clarity it felt like prophecy. "You don't have to be loud to be heard." The court began to shift around her, subtly, and then, all at once. Generals who once barked orders began phrasing requests as questions when speaking to palace staff. A senator asked the kitchen steward how long it took to knead the ceremonial bread. The royal architect stopped by the maintenance wing to compliment a corridor's resonance, a thing no one of rank had ever noticed. Kindness didn't flood the citadel. It crept. It tugged at corners long left frayed. And it all centered around the man with no medals, no rank, and no species prestige, who had hung a single paper bird in the corner of his small, sun-warmed room just beneath the eastern spire. Every morning, the child stopped there before court to breathe, to giggle, to tell him who she was going to be that day. Every evening she returned to tell him how it went. Thalexa watched this unfold from behind the mirrored doors of her observation deck, expression unreadable. Power had always been a blade in her hand. She had ruled by edge, by finality. But watching her daughter bow not out of fear but out of care, not to a soldier but to a soft-spoken man who adjusted her collar and asked if she'd eaten cracked, something she didn't know could break. That evening, she called Cal to the private chamber once used for war briefings. He arrived in silence. He never wore anything ceremonial, only his simple tunic and boots scuffed by real labor. He didn't bow. She didn't ask him to. "I thought this would end with blood," she admitted, her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. "Or politics. Some manipulation. A council coup. But not," she gestured vaguely, "not this. You expected a war," Cal said. "I am war." "No," he said. "You're a mother. You've just been hiding it behind fire." Silence stretched between them. But this one felt different, less like a standoff, more like a shared breath. "Why her?" Thalexa asked. "You lost your child. Why let yourself care again?" He didn't look away. "Because love doesn't die. It just waits. And when it sees another small hand reaching up, it remembers what it's for." She turned to the window, watching her daughter walk across the courtyard, surrounded not by guards but by gardeners and cooks and scribes who now taught her poems about listening. "Do you know what the court calls you now?" she asked. He shook his head. "They call you the man who bent the throne." The stars above Virexia shifted slower that night. At least, that's how it felt. The palace's outer domes reflected the soft burn of distant constellations, and below, in the quiet courtyard, lit only by root lanterns and a low amber haze, Cal sat cross-legged on the floor. The child curled against his side in a blanket that smelled faintly of lemon balm and starlight. Her head rested on his chest, her breathing deep and even. Her tiny hand clutched around the last button of the coat he had given her. Thalexa stood at the archway, half in shadow, her crown absent, her armor traded for silence. She hadn't called for him, hadn't summoned him for instruction or inspection. She had simply walked, barefoot and uncertain, to where she had heard her daughter's laughter last echo, and found this. The child stirred in her sleep. Cal adjusted the blanket, careful and precise, his movements practiced like ritual. There was no audience now, no court, no pressure. Just a girl, a man, and a coat, stitched with the memory of galaxies. Thalexa stepped forward, soft-footed across the obsidian tiles. She stopped beside them, gaze lowered to the girl's face. "She sleeps better with you near," she said. "Most kids sleep better near people who care," Cal replied, not unkindly. "Do you miss her?" she asked after a moment. "Myla?" He nodded once. "Every breath." Thalexa looked up at the stars. "I used to think loss made us sharper, made us more efficient, less vulnerable." He didn't argue. He just let the silence answer for them both. "I was wrong," she whispered. She reached down and gently, tentatively, touched the final button on her daughter's coat. It pulsed faintly under her fingertip, the glyph glowing warm, like the smallest sundae. She hadn't activated it, it had accepted her. Cal said nothing, but she noticed the way his jaw clenched. Not from tension, but something more delicate. "I thought power was about being untouched," she continued. "Above, unreachable, but I see it now. Real power is not what survives the storm, it's what holds someone else through it." Cal shifted, careful not to wake the girl. "Myla used to say coats were like promises. They don't stop the cold, they just remind you someone tried." Thalexa's throat tightened. She crouched beside her daughter, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and for the first time in years, whispered a lullaby in the language of her own mother. The glyphs on the coat glowed in rhythm with her voice. The child didn't stir. Above them, the sky blinked with old constellations. One formed a cluster like a button mid-thread, another like a folded bird in flight. Cal stood slowly, cradling the girl in his arms. "She's dreaming," he said. "Of what?" He smiled, soft and sure. "Of a place where no one has to be afraid of being warm." Thalexa walked beside them as they returned inside. And that night, for the first time in remembered Virexian history, the doors of the war chamber remained closed not by decree, but by choice.